Hi, I'm Ross Tayler. Welcome to Sacred Sundays, a space to slow down, tune in, and return to what's sacred within and around you. Some weeks you'll hear a sound-based offering to open the space. Other times we'll simply begin in conversation. However it unfolds, this is an invitation into presence, connection, and the beauty of the unseen. So pour a cup of tea, settle in, and let's begin.
To begin with, The Sweetgrass by Mary Oliver. Will the hungry ox stand in the field and not eat of the sweetgrass? Will the owl bite off its own wings? Will the lark forget to lift its body in the air, or forget to sing? Will the rivers run upstream? Behold, I say, behold, the reliability and the finery and the teachings of this gritty earth gift. Eat bread and understand comfort. Drink water and understand delight. Visit the garden where the scarlet trumpets are opening their bodies for the hummingbirds, who are drinking the sweetness, who are thrillingly gluttonous. For one thing leads to another. Soon you will notice how stones shine underfoot. Eventually tides will be the only calendar you believe in. And someone's face, whom you love, will be as a star, both intimate and ultimate, and you will be both heart-shaken and respectful. And you will hear the air itself, like a beloved, whisper, "Oh, let me, for a little while longer, enter the two beautiful bodies of your lungs." The witchery of living is my whole conversation with you, my darlings. All I can tell you is what I know. Look, and look again. This world is not just a little thrill for the eyes. It's more than bones. It's more than the delicate wrist with its personal pulse. It's more than the beating of the single heart. It's praising. It's giving until the giving feels like receiving. You have a life. Just imagine that. You have this day, and maybe another, and maybe still another. Someday I am going to ask my friend Paulus, the dancer, the potter, to make me a begging bowl, which I believe my soul needs. And if I come to you, to the door of your comfortable house, with unwashed clothes and unclean fingernails, will you put something into it? I would like to take this chance. I would like to give you this chance. We do one thing or another. We stay the same or we change. Congratulations if you have changed. Let me ask you this. Do you also think that beauty exists for some fabulous reason? And if you have not been enchanted by this adventure, your life, what would do for you? What I loved in the beginning, I think, was mostly myself. Never mind that I had to, since somebody had to. That was many years ago. Since then, I have gone out from my confinements, though with difficulty. I mean the ones that thought to rule my heart. I cast them out. I put them on the mush pile. They will be nourishment somehow. Everything is nourishment somehow, or another. And I have become the child of the clouds, and of hope. I have become the friend of the enemy, whoever that is. I have become older, and cherishing what I have learned, I have become younger. And what do I risk to tell you this, which is all I know? Love yourself, then forget it. Then love the world.
The offering you just heard was Jessica Schafer sharing Mary Oliver's poem, To Begin with the Sweetgrass. Jessica is a poet, psychotherapist, and mother. She has been a listener her whole life and wholeheartedly believes in the power of compassionate presence, with ourselves and with others. Jessica is a master's of counseling psychology and a certificate in spiritual direction. She is the founder of My Inner Harbour, a community self-care space in Nanaimo, BC. Her vision is to help others rest, reflect, and reconnect by providing a space for meaningful self-care and community connections. Jessica's favorite spiritual practices are time at the beach, poetry, and being with friends. I'm honored to welcome Jessica to the Sacred Sundays podcast.
Thanks, Ross. So good to be here.
I met Jessica August of last year when I was visiting Nanaimo and deciding whether I wanted to move here. And it was such a great experience to experience your self-care workshop. And it was definitely a connection that I knew I wanted to follow up on when I arrived in Nanaimo, which I eventually chose to do. And since then, I've really enjoyed doing some talks at My Inner Harbour. And I also host a men's group there.
Yeah. Well, and when I met you last year as well, I kind of kept my ear to the ground with our mutual friend about, is Ross coming? Is he not coming? Will this be happening? And then when you arrived, I knew that definitely we needed to connect on both collaborating, but also personally just to be in touch.
Absolutely. So let's talk about that beautiful poem that you shared, and perhaps you could start by just sharing with us what it is that speaks to you in that particular poem.
I think there are so many threads that could be pulled out of this poem.
I would agree.
The first time I read it, the thing that really struck me, there were two couplets in this poem. The line, "Look and look again. This world is not just a little thrills for the eyes." And then in the little further down into the poem, "We do one thing or another. We stay the same or we change." And that line, "Congratulations if you have changed." I remember reading that and feeling just this huge sense of relief because for whatever reason, for many different reasons in my life, change has not always been perceived by others as a good thing in my life. So to have that sort of sense of external validation of like, congratulations if you've actually changed. It's like, oh, thank you. So yeah, those would be the two big things.
Oh, that's big. I flagged some of those lines that you shared as well. And one of them that stood out for me was the witchery of living. I thought that was really potent.
Yes.
And just the overall reflection of nature. I mean, I very much find nature to be a source of inspiration and wisdom and all sorts of things. And so, that line of, well, just the overall theme of reflections from nature, I found that really nourishing as well.
Yes, the blessing of the earth is this reliability, but also the finery. Like both of those things are things that bless us. And I think one of the things about poetry, why it's one of my favorite spiritual practices, and also why I think it really like lends itself for me towards self-care, is because it forces you to notice the little details. All the little details she brings up, like the specific sort of mention of the wrist and its personal pulse. Like I would never normally just think about my wrist, but a poem makes you pause and say, oh yeah, like look at that wrist and that little pulse that you can see sometimes beating. Wow, like look at that detail. Or the scarlet trumpets with the hummingbirds. And it forces you to slow down and forces you to like really observe and notice what's around you. And that's where you get to see beauty, and that's where you get to experience joy. If you haven't slowed down enough, you can miss those things. You miss sort of that beauty.
Yeah, there was so many parts of the poem that sparked my visual kind of, I would go off on these tangents of memories and places where I had experienced that before. And so I actually had to re-listen to the poem a few times to really like take it in, because I kept going off on these little inner journeys as I was listening to it.
Yes. And I think that's actually really deliberate in a sense, because some poems are very cohesive where it's like the whole poem is telling the same story. And so you read it from start to finish and you have this sense of completion. But poems like this, they take you on a million different tangents, and that is actually the whole point. There are a million different tangents, a million different sparks that we can follow that could nourish us if we just stopped and paid attention. Even just pausing in the woods, like, going for a walk, you could see 10 different things just, in that one little space that catch your eye and are beautiful and do take you down that sort of, which one am I going to follow? Is there something I want to pick up here?
I walk a lot in the forest, and I often walk in the same places. And I often wonder, it's like, does anybody else notice the feather that I just saw? Does anybody else notice the mushrooms growing in the corner of that tree? I had a funny experience this morning just before we met, and the sun was shining back through the back of a fairly large stump. But it was shining through in such a way that from the front, through the opening, you could see the light inside the stump.
Cool.
So it was kind of magical. And I actually had to go off the path to take some photos of it. And this fellow was walking by and he said, "Oh, do you know what that is?" And I immediately knew he wasn't seeing what I was seeing. He was talking about something else. And what he wanted to teach me about was the notch in the tree of where the springboard had been put in so that they could cut the tree down. And I just thought it was so interesting. It's like, there I am taking this beautiful photo of this moment of the sun shining through. And this fellow noticed something completely different and maybe didn't even notice the light in the tree. And yeah, I think that's one of the things that reflected to me in the poem, was just like all these things that we can bring attention to, and we all see something different.
Yeah, it's that look and look again. So you looked once and saw the light, and then somebody else looked and saw this notch. And if you looked again, you'd probably find a mushroom on the base of the tree, or if you looked again, there, the light would have shifted and suddenly something else would have been illuminated. So there's also that like constant invitation to pause and to notice again, and not just sort of be like, "Yep, saw that, all done."
Absolutely. And so, Jessica, tell me how, I think you kind of alluded to it already, but say a little bit more about how poetry relates to your experience of engaging the sacred.
Oh, that's a good question. I think for me, so much of my childhood experience of the sacred was shaped by what I'm going to call sort of nonfiction or facts. Like I was taught facts. I missed out on, or I feel like maybe it wasn't emphasized, or just how I was taught the poetry or the mystical sort of experience of something that's greater than ourselves, of the divine. So when I started having kind of some of these moments of awe, moments where I was just blown away by the world, moments where, like you talk about seeing the light in that stump. And I remember vividly a very early morning drive. I was probably in my early teens, and it was probably 4:30 in springtime. So like the light just barely starting, and there was fog, mist rising off the fields that we were driving past, and I was just so captivated by how beautiful it was. Just like early morning sunrise, this mist, and it was farmers' fields, so it's lonely. There weren't a lot of people around. And that kind of experience of awe, of gratitude, of just being so present to your surroundings, and also connecting that moment to something beyond yourself. It wasn't something I had a lot of language for. And so I actually started writing poetry as a teen, trying to capture some of these moments, just writing down how they looked or what was profound about them, and noticing that something very specific, a very specific image, fog rising off the field, would take my brain into other places, like the metaphor that came from it, like that sense of a broader truth or a broader sort of spiritual experience that comes out of a very specific moment. That's something that poetry does brilliantly. Poetry is so good at taking something like, the hummingbirds who are drinking the sweetness, taking that image, which we can see very clearly. Oh yeah, hummingbird at a flower, getting it, and then relating it to a bigger truth, and relating it to sort of a grander, or like sort of a larger experience that then we also can relate to. So that sense of being thrillingly gluttonous. What is it in my life that I just, drink up like a hummingbird? Is there anything in my life that I drink up like a hummingbird? Like maybe that's something I should think about. Why not? So poetry takes us from very minute, specific moments into sort of reflective space. And there's so much possibility there. So that's what I love. And that's what also then helps me see that all the facts I grew up with, that there was just room for a greater or a broader understanding of the sacred and the divine, and that there are many different ways to approach spiritual practice. Yeah.
Wow, that's a beautiful description. And I really love the connection to the divine and your spiritual connection with yourself as well as the world around you. And I love that just before you said it, when you said thrillingly gluttonous, I was thinking of that very line. And because it really is a powerful line, like it's so true. Hummingbirds are just so full of joy and wonder, and to see it in that lens is very unique, I guess. So how has poetry impacted the way that you show up? Because you mentioned a lot of what I would interpret as very left brain kind of ways of being when you were growing up,
Mhm.
and then discovering these more right brain flowing moments and just the complete opposite. How has that informed who you are in the world and how you work in the world?
That's a great question. I think poetry has actually been really helpful for me to hold a both and perspective. It's so easy to want to categorize and want to create binaries and want to, you know, have tidy categories for everything. Especially as a mental health therapist for many years, there are a number of tools that we're given and taught that are very sort of um, if X then Y, A plus B plus C equals D. And so it was really helpful to have that balance of everyone's personal experience is going to be so unique, and that has to be honored first. And maybe I can apply some of these strategies or techniques or tools I've been given, but only through their lens. And so the poetry helps you kind of see that metaphors can be taken so many different ways. Everyone who reads the poem is going to pull out a different piece. And that flexibility, I think, is part of how I choose to show up in the world. Now I try to be so aware that my own experience is my own experience, and I can't extrapolate from me to anybody else. And so I have to be really careful about listening, noticing, paying attention. What is somebody else telling me about themselves? And what are they saying about who they are and how they want to be treated and what they need in this situation? And how can I bring my perspective into that? Or where is it appropriate? Where is it not appropriate? How do we, what questions can I ask for clarification? Like all of that, like poetry gives you sort of this like, stop, pause, pay attention, get really nitty gritty, like find those little details. Make sure you really sort of have looked at all of those bones or that, the stones underfoot. Notice how they shine, like all of those things. Like if you haven't really paid attention, you're not ready yet. So yeah, poetry makes me pay attention. And that's my first step anywhere.
I love what you said about flexibility and listening and noticing. It makes me think that your form of deep listening is very much rooted in all that you described. And that form of deep listening is multifaceted and helps you to uncover and helps your clients to really benefit from that deep listening. Would you say that's true?
Yeah, I think because I try to listen first without the agenda, right? What we're taught is to listen without an agenda. Don't listen for the answer you're going to give, right? Listen for what's being said, pause, reflect on it, and then respond. And so when you do that with someone, whether it's a close friend, a family member, or a client, you give them space to hear themselves because they're not immediately having to deal with your response, or they're not thinking, oh, she's just going to come right back and say this. When you just hold what's being said, then they can hear themselves and clarify for themselves. And that gives you even more clarity. And this is something I love for myself as well. When I sit with my spiritual director, really so much of the session for me is about, what did I say? I said this. That came out of my mouth. Huh. I wonder what I meant by that. Okay, so I really feel strongly about that. And her job is really just to continue to reflect back to me. Oh, you said this. Tell me more about that. Oh, I did say that, didn't I? So it's hugely beneficial to be able to hear ourselves. And we can't really know, a lot of us, especially if we like to process verbally, how we really feel about something until someone else has witnessed it. So that witnessing piece, that's poetry all over again. Poetry witnesses the world.
You're reminding me of a card reading at some point that was recorded. And because I had listened to it on my phone, it came up in my playlist. And as I was driving, this session came back up and I was listening to it. It was 2 years old. And as I listened to it, I realized that the practitioner had a completely different interpretation of what I had said. And there was no checking for understanding. And this reading went in a direction based on a complete misunderstanding. And it was only that I happened to listen to it 2 years later that I realized that.
Oh, wow. How did you feel at the time? Do you remember how you felt at the time?
I think at the time, because I was really searching for answers, There was just this assumption of clarity.
Mm,
I found it fascinating. And
yeah.
because everything you're describing is very much the opposite of what I just described.
Yeah, and I've definitely had those moments in sessions where I do think I understand what's being said, but then it's my job to check.
Yes,
I think this is what you're saying. Is this what you're saying, or have I got it wrong? And then
exactly.
it gives so much permission for someone to come back and be like, no, no, that's not actually what I meant.
Exactly.
And yeah, go from
Yeah.
there.
So you mentioned working with your spiritual director, and in your bio it said you have a certificate in spiritual direction. I'm curious for myself and the listeners, what exactly is that? Can you say more about spiritual direction?
Yeah, spiritual direction is a, a companionship model, essentially, for your spiritual journey. So it grew out of traditional religious settings where monks and nuns would have had a spiritual director in their monastery who was their mentor, the person that they would go and check in with about their own spiritual life. It's really sort of evolved from there into a practice that covers all kinds of both religious all the way to not religious, but spiritually in tune in a variety of ways. And it's for me, it's a monthly check-in. I sit with my spiritual director to just process my life and look at it through that sacred lens. What is occurring for me? What do I need to pay attention to? Where do I sense sort of divine movement or sacred moments that I really want to honor or that I need to listen to? So yeah, it's a very flexible practice, actually. You can make it very structured. There are very structured formats for it in the traditional Catholic sort of realm, and then it goes all the way out to sort of where I feel I'm positioned in the spiritual but not religious community, if you want to call it that.
Okay. And as you were speaking about it, it makes me think about how you relate to poetry as well, because poetry is very much about observing and noticing, as we talked about earlier. And it feels like that's what you're being invited to do when you sit with your spiritual director as well, that observing what's happening in your life, observing what's happening in the world around you. Would you agree?
Yes. Yes, absolutely. It is about noticing and it's about witnessing together.
And so early on, you used the phrase, when we slow down enough, which I think you know that I love that because I say it all the time. And it's such a reflection to everything you just said as well. When we slow down, we start to notice things that they've always been there, but we just haven't seen them because we're going so quickly.
Yeah. Yeah, I always talk about sort of you can't actually do meaningful self-care or any kind of meaningful spiritual work on sort of our day-to-day mind, our task list, I'm doing this right now, tidying. You actually have to pause and sink into this sort of slightly lower level of consciousness where you're watching yourself a little bit more. Where you're like, oh, I feel stressed about that. Huh. And then you actually have a chance to say, oh, do I want to explore this further? Why do I feel stressed about that? Or if I don't want to explore it further, how do I just help myself in the moment right now? What do I need to care for this stress right here? But we don't, yeah, if we don't slow down enough, we can't get to that question. We just skip it. We're just like, oh, I'm stressed. Go, 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 go. And then we don't actually do the care or the reflection that would help us process whatever is happening.
And so many of the answers actually come from inside of us, not outside of us as well.
Absolutely.
You're making me think of this body of work called the Gene Keys. And Richard Rudd, who channeled the Gene Keys, created this little book called The Art of Contemplation. And it's this tiny little book packed with a guide on how to do what you just described. And he kind of maps it out into, how you might perceive the steps of contemplation. But it's such an important part of growing and learning about ourselves, because if we can't stop long enough, we just don't get to connect with those things that are asking and wanting to change. Even as simple as when we're feeling anxiety, we can focus on trying to make the feeling go away and looking at all the tactics to try and change the feeling. But if we just be with the feeling and then sensation and see it, it's like, oh, I'm feeling anxious. Hello, anxiety. It often goes away that quickly because it just wants to be seen.
Yeah, it just wants to be acknowledged. And it just wants to be affirmed that it's okay that it's there. Like, yep, something came up that caused anxiety. I see you. Thanks for being there. Like, you're
Exactly.
working. Yeah.
Actually, yesterday I was feeling a little bit of anxiety, and I was like, wait a second, what's going on? What is this trying to inform me of? Because seemingly everything was fine. And all I did was just acknowledge it, just like you said, and just allow it to be there, because it's not a bad part of me. Yes, it can be uncomfortable, but it's as much of a valuable sign as anything.
Yeah, it's that sort of understanding that emotions are information. So you can do what you want with the information, but in and of itself, it's almost a neutral thing. It's just there. It's just giving you data. And when you look at it, you're like, "Oh, okay, thanks." Instead of being like, "Oh no, the data's there, run away." And then it's like, "No, no, I still need you to know this stuff." Like, hi.
Yeah.
So,
I experienced My Inner Harbour. I think you've curated a beautiful space that allows people to experience self-care in
thank
meaningful
you.
ways. And perhaps you could say a little bit about how that came to be.
Mm. So, as a therapist, I found myself, especially in the last few years of my practice, I'm not currently practicing, working a lot with clients who fully understood the concept of self-care, knew what they wanted to do for self-care, really wished that they could follow through on it more often, and just found that they couldn't. It was hard to get out the watercolors and actually sit there and watercolor. The journal sat on the bedside table collecting dust. It just felt so kind of like, why can't I do this? And so as we dug deeper, we just kept being curious, like, why is this so hard? What's really getting in the way here? And so often it actually turned out to be logistics. Doing things at home, while it's great that it's comfortable, it's your space, sometimes it's actually also distracting because there's laundry that has to be folded and there are dishes that need to be washed and put in the, you know, put away. And so often our busy minds, because we don't slow down enough, our busy minds go to, oh, I should just finish that quickly. Oh, I should just get that done. Oh, I should just finish this. Or if we have dependents at home, if we're caregiving for an elder or for children, then there's really legitimate needs that might supersede our own. Mommy, I need this. And you're in the middle of trying to journal and now you have to put it down. And so I started thinking, what if there was a place we could go, similar to a gym, where you can just pop in, do your workout, and leave again. And there's none of those distractions of being at home. And you can just focus. You can sink into that sort of second level of consciousness. You can really do that pause and then listen to yourself and say, okay, what do I need today? So that was the inspiration for My Inner Harbor, which is intended to be that space, to provide sort of a calm, soothing, welcoming space where you can come in and do a variety of self-care practices on your own time and then go home again and not have to clean up after yourself and just have all the materials there provided. So we have several different options or rooms sort of set up. So there's a body room where you can do breathing and mindfulness, and a mind room that's more cognitive for working with values or journal prompts or reading. And we have a spirit room that's all the intuitive, artistic, creative practices like collage and watercolor and coloring. And then we do have the community room as well, because that was the second piece that sort of really stuck out to me post-COVID, was how lonely we are, how much we need human connection, how much we crave in-person community, and how hard it is to actually find community that feels purposeful or meaningful. So that was also part of the intention, was that what if we did our self-care together? And then you have that sense of there are other people who are working on themselves, who are investing time in themselves, and they're supporting me by doing their own work. What if we had that? So that's the hope and the intention behind it. And yeah, it's still very brand new. We just started, so I'm still kind of feeling my way and hoping that it will become something that resonates further.
I know that I've certainly enjoyed the experience. I remember one day going into the spirit room and doing a collage. And one of the things I really appreciated was everything that I needed was right there. I could just really focus on the creative aspect of it and be free to create that collage. And it just took all the thinking part of it out of it, which was great.
Yeah.
And I've certainly really enjoyed the community room, both for hosting the men's group, but also the different talks and speakers that you have and experiencing those. I mean, there is a real energy of connecting with like-minded people as well, which is brilliant.
Yeah, I've so enjoyed, and I have so appreciated your help as well with facilitating a number of different events that have just sparked so much interest and conversation. And it's the conversation that's people are so fed, so nourished by a good, meaningful conversation, and that's just delightful to see.
It's so true. Well, we're at the part where we need to wrap up. And I always like to close by asking a question. And the question I want to ask you is, what is one simple way someone could connect with the sacred today?
Well, I had like 25 things pop into my head. I'm gonna echo so many other mystics and spiritual beings over time and just say breath, and just taking a deep breath, preferably outside, a deep breath of fresh air. Yeah.
I love the simplicity of that. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for having me, Ross.
Oh, you're welcome. And for people who want to stay connected or explore more of your work, where's the best place for them to find you?
We have a website, myinnerharbour.ca, and also are on social. So on Instagram and Facebook at My Inner Harbour. So those would be the best places to connect.
Excellent. And we'll share those in the show notes. Thank you, Jessica. It was so great to have you here. And to everyone listening, thank you for tuning in. Until next time, take good care.
Thanks, Ross.
Thank you for joining us here on Sacred Sundays. I hope something in today's offering spoke to your spirit, stirred something true, or simply gave you a moment to breathe. You can find more Sacred Sundays episodes, as well as other conversations from the Sacred Village podcast at sacredvillagepodcast.com. Feel free to share this episode with someone who might need it. Until next time, may your Sunday be slow and sacred. Bye for now.